obviously the most overtly political. So what have you enjoyed most exploring this season so far with the socioeconomic?
Well, it's a double-edged sword for me because I'm exploring Jean outside of the DEO, which has really been fun for me. Probably the first time I've had an opportunity to really play the character that I didn't even audition for, but first time I've really played the character to his true self, being outside the DEO. But I think the show itself, I think Robert and Jessica have done a really good job of, I guess, mirroring the current climate and trying to ground the show. And I think we're all grateful that they did. The previous shows have been just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think last year was just so huge that I think it was difficult to kind of keep some kind of perspective. So it's good that we're getting out of the DEO, getting out of our own world and more into the world of National City, and trying to really understand the politics of what's happening on the street. And I think that's refreshing, and also gives us an opportunity to face a different kind of adversary, one where we can't just use our strength to solve it. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at today's problems. It's not cut and dry and simple. No simple answers.
With an adversary you can't just punch. Does it put John in a unique position because you have mental powers? You can theoretically change people's minds, but obviously that's not the way that you do things.
Not wholly, but I do think that. I think John is wrestling with the this season with whether or not he wants to really truly follow the path of his father, and I think he feels that reading people's minds and changing people's minds is a form of violence, because it's invading somebody's personal space, invading somebody's personal personality, and going in and messing around with them. And I think he's not okay with that. It's just to do it willy-nilly. So I think it's and also there's a lot of people out there, so he'll probably get exhausted. But there's a lot of people's minds to change, and I think with this, I think the change has to be more organic. More organic. I don't think this is something that he can magic away, or anybody can magic away. This is something where it's about hearts and minds.
Do you like the thing that I like about this season is the spiritual journey that you're on, characters on. That's a different thing for you because it's always been brute force. You've always been a law and order type guy, but your father showed you there's a different way.
Yeah.
So, especially the last episode with the healer, how do you feel? Do you like this arc where you're going on this sort of more of a spiritual journey, and you're butting heads with the people that still want to do it the law and order way?
I've mixed feelings about, because I think he is, after all, he's the Martian Manhunter. He's had 300 years of being a sort of let's say vengeful, but a guy who's got a purpose to right wrongs and to see justice done. And I think I'm wrestling, and I think he's wrestling with the notion of how to do that. And so the spiritual journey. I mean, I loved working with Carl. That was great last season working with him, and I like the fact that they've put this dilemma forward for him, but I'm not sure it's his true nature. So I'm wrestling with it as much as the character, I think, because yes, whilst I think violence isn't always the answer, I also think that as a character, I'm the first 3 or 4 episodes, I was kind of struggling to find a way into this new character, and I found that quite difficult because the spiritual element to it just seems a little bit doesn't seem true to him. It's not a natural fit. I mean, I like the fact that he's finding other ways to solve problems, but I'm looking forward to Jean punching people in the face again.
And as an actor, it's probably a very good thing. You probably like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always. I mean, the fact that for me, the fact that he's left the DEO is fantastic because it gives him an opportunity to be much more of a rounded character. And I've found that just as an actor, speaking his lines are different because in the DEO it's all exposition and sort of barking orders, and I found that I've had to just find a different tone for Jean's voice because he's talking to people and not barking orders, and that's been really fun to play. Actually, having a conversation with somebody and having a relationship with somebody rather than trying to be stuck behind the sort of boss role. So it's been fun for me, but certain elements of the spiritual journey haven't always quite rung true.
Is John going to continue to mentor Alex as she's her new role at CEO?
I don't think she needs mentoring. I think she's the boss. I think Alex is. I think there's always going to be room for the Danvers family to kind of give each other moral support and emotional support. I hope we don't lose that. I don't think we do lose that. So I think we kind of will continue to be supportive of each other, but just not at the DEO. And there's some really interesting stuff. I mean, I think I would have to say anyway that this season has been the most interesting season that we've had certainly since we moved to Canada. So I'd say of the 3 seasons that we've had up here, these are the scripts that really I'm finding quite gripping. So they're very different, and I think, as I say, Robert and Jessica have done a great job. So I hope we don't lose that element of the kind of Danvers family, and I don't think we will, but it does get very complex and complicated.
Alex is having some new conflicts with some higher ups at the DEO. Does she go to John for any advice on how to deal with
Yeah, as I say, it's going to get very complicated, very, very, very complex. And I love Haley. I think Colonel Haley's just a fantastic addition. I think she's a great actress and a really great presence. So it's great to have. I mean, I said last season, I suggested that we have a presence, a kind of darker presence at the DEO, and I'm really glad that how they've done that. I think the fact that there's some kind of oversight to Alex and a very different perspective is going to be a real challenge to Alex and to us to have a DEO that is suddenly acting totally the opposite way to how it was when Jean was in charge. I think is it's a real threat, and I think possibly returning to the dark days of Hank Henshaw as opposed to John Jones. So yeah, excited to see what the next scripts bring, because where we are right now, it's getting very, very deep and dark, and it could be very interesting to see how it plays out.
We've seen this season explore the idea of passing. So who within the alien community chooses to pass as human, what responsibility you have. And I think John's character is really interesting because he has this natural chameleon ability. He can choose an occupations to present as human. Will we see him engage more with that theme as the season goes on, or is that not something that character?
Yeah, I very much hope so. I think that's one of his main strengths, is the ability to shapeshift and disguise himself. But I also think that there's something very I like the fact that he's becoming more at ease with himself not, outside of the DEO, just becoming much more at ease with himself as a human, and somebody that can just walk amongst the people and learn from them and observe them. So I think I'm hoping. Obviously, we haven't got scripts too far in advance. I'm hoping that there's more of in helping people. We see that Jean can help people in a myriad of different ways. If it's him being a cat, if it's him being a dog, giving someone pleasure, he can just do anything. And I love. There's a wonderful story in one of the comic books called. I think it's Man of a Thousand Faces, I think. And there's this wonderful story. This old lady is kind of stroking this cat on this park bench in Italy. And as the camera kind of zooms in, his eyes glow red. And you realise, I just love the fact that he's halfway around the world just being a cat, And the main I think he helps people, Jean helps people wherever he can. So if it means he's a young boy talking to an old man, if it means he's an old man talking to a young... I think he finds ways of helping people. I think there's also one version of Martian Manhunter comics where he marries an Asian lady and moves to the Philippines and spends the rest of his life living on the beach because he can. And I just love that about him, that all he's concerned about is helping people. And if that means changing and adopting a different shape, he'll do that. So I hope we get to explore that. Looking forward to being a cat.
As things get kind of darker, obviously the DEO has a history of being terrible for aliens, which John reformed. Does he feel kind of responsibility, or does he feel guilt about leaving that role and then immediately seeing kind of a backslide?
I don't think it's guilt. I mean, I think, you only have to look at what's happening right now in America, particularly, I mean, it's hard to believe that it was only 3 years ago we had a very different leader of the free world, and everything seemed kind of cool. And suddenly you've got 3 years later, forces of darkness, real right-wing forces growing all over the place, and it's a scary time. So I think that's just a change. I think it's the change in administration and changing times. I don't think it's for John to feel guilty about. I think he's proud of his tenure at the DEO, but now it's a different reality, different world, and a different administration. And if anything, I think he feels more now that it's time for him to go to work and really protect people and just work in a different way, as opposed to trying to do that through the DEO.
Will there be any check-in with Magan or what's happening on Mars?
I hope so. It was always fun to work with Sharon. She was great. And likewise, I'd like to. There's talk of Carl Lumbey returning in some shape or form, which would be great. It depends whether he's available and whether we can make that work. But it would be nice to commune with him again. So yeah, hopefully there's a return to Mars at some point. So I can't. The amount of times I've been knocked out in this show is extraordinary, or taken out. So it's always been a bit frustrating because you just know that wouldn't happen, and so I have to be careful about reading too much or taking too much from Martian Manhunter comics, because it's can get a little frustrating.
So now that the anti-alien rage is kind of out, now the genie's out of the bottle, do you think the show could ever walk away from that now, or is that now just a permanent fixture?
Yeah, I think I know. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but I would imagine I would imagine that, and you know, we all saw it. We all saw it. It's unfortunate, you know. You see it on September 11th. We saw it in London on 7/7. That as soon as there's an attack, or as soon as something happens, people just become one. People band together, and I'm quite sure that should there be a threat, that differences would be put aside, and people would see their fellow human being as a human being, as opposed to a red or a blue or an alien. You know, I think whenever a group of people are threatened, people tend to stick together. So I would imagine that at some point in the show, there's going to be something that where people have to put down their differences and work together in order to defeat an outside threat. So I would imagine that's what's going to happen.